In a world that's constantly walking the tightroad between peace and destruction, the question isn't just who has more weapons or troops, it's about who truly holds the power when everything is on the line. That's the question we're asking today. If war breaks out between Israel and Iran, who would really win? Is it Israel, with its unmatched high-tech military arsenal, or is it Iran, with its sheer numbers and geographical weight? Let's break this down heart to heart, truth by truth. Let's start with the basics, the numbers. Iran is a nation of nearly 92 million people. Israel, just 9.4 million. That's a massive gap. And yes, those numbers carry over into their military size too. Iran has 610,000 active troops, 350,000 reservists, 220,000 paramilitary fighters. That's a total of 1.18 million armed personnel. Now compare that to Israel. 170,000 active duty soldiers, 465,000 in reserves, 35,000 paramilitary troops. That brings them to around 670,000 total military personnel. That's a little over half of Iran's strength. At first glance, it looks like Israel is clearly outnumbered. But numbers can be misleading. Israel has something few countries in the world have: a culture of military readiness. Military service in Israel is mandatory. Almost every citizen, man or woman, has trained in combat, lived in discipline, and is prepared to fight. Iran also has mandatory military service, but only for men. And yet, due to the huge population difference, Iran still has more people who've worn the uniform. So if it came down to sheer manpower, Iran would likely dominate. Same goes for ground equipment. Tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, rocket systems. Iran leads in almost every category. And at sea, it's a similar story. Israel has no frigates, no destroyers, no aircraft carriers, just 5 submarines. Iran, it has 19 submarines and better presence in naval waters. But don't let that fool you, because in reality, this won't be a war fought with ships or tanks rolling across desert borders. Take a look at the map. Israel and Iran are not neighbors. Between them are Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. No convoy can cross that unchallenged. Neither country can afford or even execute a full-scale land invasion. Iran won't be sending tanks into Tel Aviv, and Israel won't be marching through Baghdad to get to Tehran. So here's the truth. This war, if it ever happens, won't be fought on the ground or at sea. It'll be fought in the air, and that's where Israel stands tallest. Let's talk air power. Israel has 241 fighter jets. Iran has 186. Israel has 39 dedicated attack aircraft. Iran, 23. Israel flies 48 attack helicopters. Iran, just 13. But it's not just about quantity, it's about quality. Iran is flying aircraft from another era. Think 1960S American F-4S, a few Russian Su-24S, and some patched up leftovers. These planes were built before the internet existed. Israel, they've got the cutting-edge F-15S, F-16S, and the game-changing F-35 stealth fighters. These jets can strike without being seen and hit without warning. Iran's aging jets simply don't stand a chance in an air-to-air match. So yes, Israel dominates the skies. But Iran knew this long ago. And it didn't try to compete where it couldn't win. Instead, it took a different route. A cheaper, less flashy, but deadly path. Drones and missiles. Iran's Shahed-136 drones are infamous. They're fast, cheap, kamikaze-style weapons that can overwhelm air defenses. And Iran has hundreds, possibly thousands of them. They may not have F-35S, but they can flood the skies with machines that explode on impact. Then there's Iran's missile arsenal, the Fatah 1 and 2, hypersonic missiles developed indigenously. These are harder to intercept, tougher to track, and capable of deep strikes. So while Israel needs to take out just over 200 jets, Iran needs to shoot down dozens of drones and missiles every single day. That's exhausting, that's expensive, that's war on a different level. But military strength is just one side of the coin. There's also the matter of economy And here the scales tip in Israel's favor heavily. Israel is one of the wealthiest nations in West Asia. Iran, on the other hand, has spent decades under crushing sanctions. Even though its population is 10 times bigger, Iran's economy is smaller. It survives on oil and weapons exports. But what happens if those oil fields are bombed? If drone factories are reduced to rubble? War is expensive. Sustaining it is even harder. And economically, Iran doesn't have the depth to withstand a long war. And now comes Israel's final and perhaps most important advantage. The United States of America. Israel is not alone. It never fights alone. No matter who sits in the White House, one thing doesn't change. If Israel is in trouble, America comes running, not just with words or condemnation, but with firepower. Iran has friends, yes. Russia, China, but those are strategic allies, not right or deep partners. They won't risk war with the West for Iran's sake, but the US would for Israel. And that may be the ultimate decider. So, who would win if war breaks out? It's not a simple answer. Iran has the numbers. Israel has the technology. Iran has the reach. Israel has the allies. But the real question is, can anyone actually win in such a war? Or will the people of both nations lose everything for the pride of a few? War may have its victors, but peace has survivors. In every conflict, the world often watches through numbers and stats how many troops are on the ground, how many jets in the sky, how many missiles ready to launch. We look at charts, analyze technology, measure power through machines. But here's the truth most people forget. Wars are not won by numbers alone. Battles are not truly decided by the might of weapons or even by the sophistication of technology. There's something far greater at stake and something far deeper that determines the real outcome. Wisdom, restraint, and the will to choose peace over pride. You see, when a nation is armed to the teeth, it's easy to believe it is ready for war. But real strength is not shown in how loudly you roar, but in how calmly you can walk away when everything inside you wants to fight. Because pride is dangerous. It demands a response. It pushes people to prove something. It says, you must not back down. And when two sides feed into that, when pride takes the wheel, destruction is never far behind. Wisdom is different. Wisdom looks beyond the emotion of the moment. It pauses to consider the cost, not just to the country, but to the people. To mothers waiting for sons to return, to children hiding in fear, to families torn apart by airstrikes and explosions. Wisdom hears the voices that pride drowns out. It thinks of tomorrow, not just today. Restraint is not weakness, it's the highest form of discipline. It's choosing not to strike, even when you have every right to, even when you have the capability to destroy, because sometimes the most powerful act is to not retaliate, to not escalate, to not answer violence with violence. That takes a different kind of courage, one that machines and missiles can never measure. And then there's peace. A word we throw around so easily, but forget how difficult it is to truly choose it. Peace is not passive. It's not about ignoring injustice or pretending that everything is fine. Peace is active. It is intentional. It means choosing dialogue when all you want is revenge. It means extending a hand when all you've known is conflict. It means building a future that your children can live in without fear. Sometimes choosing peace feels like losing, like backing down, like giving in. But real peace doesn't humiliate, it heals. It doesn't silence truth, it speaks it with compassion. It doesn't forget pain, it learns from it. And in the heart of all these choices, wisdom, restraint, peace, there is one powerful force, humility. The humility to admit that war, even when justified, leaves scars that may never fully heal. The humility to say, we can win without killing. We can be strong without being feared. Because at the end of the day, even the most high-tech fighter jet cannot rebuild a broken home. Even the most powerful missile cannot mend the heart of a grieving parent. And even the loudest war cry cannot comfort a child who has lost everything. Technology may protect borders, but it cannot heal wounds of the soul. So yes, numbers and weapons might tell us who has the edge, but they won't tell us who has the heart. And in times like these, When the world feels like it's one wrong move away from collapse, we need more than just strategy. We need wisdom that chooses life over ego. We need restraint that values people over power. We need leaders willing to hold back when it's easier to push forward. Because the real victory isn't in proving you're stronger, it's in proving you're wiser. The real win isn't in crushing the enemy, it's in ending the need for enemies at all. The world doesn't need another war to remember. It needs a moment in history where people chose differently, where they could have fought, but they didn't, where they could have destroyed, but they decided to build, where they could have fed pride, but they chose peace. And if even one leader, one nation, one voice stands up and says, enough, we will not be moved by rage, we will move with wisdom, then maybe, just maybe, the world still has a chance to breathe. You can win a war and still lose a generation. That's the kind of truth we don't often talk about. Because when war is discussed, it's usually through the lens of territory gain, enemies defeated, and power displayed. But no one really talks about the hearts broken in silence, the children who grow up never knowing peace, the lives that may survive the war, but never feel whole again. What people often forget is that war is not just about the people holding the guns. It's about the ones left behind, the ones who carry the weight of the decisions made by those in power, the young minds shaped by fear instead of freedom, the teenagers who learn more about hiding from bombs than dreaming about their future. That's the generation that war steals. Not in one moment, but in quiet, invisible ways. A war may give one side the satisfaction of winning, of being right, of standing tall on a battlefield. But what does it cost the soul of a nation? What happens when a child wakes up to the sound of sirens instead of birds? What happens when playgrounds turn into shelters and schools become targets? What does a win even mean when your future generations grow up angry, anxious, or numb? We often celebrate military victories. We honor the strategy, the bravery, the precision. But we forget to mourn what is lost in the process. Not just lives, but innocence, trust, hope, the kind of soft, unspoken things that don't make the headlines but leave the deepest scars. There are kids out there who won't remember the reason for the war, but they will carry its effects for the rest of their lives. They'll struggle to sleep without hearing echoes of destruction. They'll struggle to trust, to feel safe, to believe in peace again. War doesn't just destroy buildings, it chips away at humanity. We sometimes think of war as a last resort, but what if the greatest strength is in finding a way before the last resort? What if courage isn't only found in picking up arms, but in putting them down? In having the discipline to walk away, the maturity to de-escalate, the wisdom to understand that true leadership doesn't always show its might through force. No war ever ends without consequences, even the ones that are won. Because somewhere in the ruins, a generation is watching, learning, absorbing, and they will either grow up to repeat the pain or rise above it, depending on what we teach them today. Every missile launched sends a message. Every airstrike, every retaliation, it tells the next generation, this is how problems are solved. This is how we respond when we're hurt. This is how we protect what's ours. But what if we chose to send a different message? One that says, you don't have to fight to be heard. You don't have to destroy to be strong. You don't have to go to war to lead. We owe them more than survival. We owe them peace that's not temporary. We owe them homes that won't shake from the sound of warplanes. We owe them days that are filled with laughter, not fear. We owe them the chance to grow up without the burden of pain they didn't choose. We owe them the chance to feel, to be fulfilled. We owe them the chance to have fun they didn't choose. We owe them the chance to feel. We owe them the chance to feel. We owe them the chance to experience, to be uplifted. It's easy to focus on who won, who lost, who surrendered. But the real question is, what did the children witness? What did they internalize? What will they carry in their hearts? Because that's the legacy of every war. the quiet suffering of the next generation. If we keep winning wars but losing generations, we're not really winning anything. We're just delaying healing. We're just recycling pain. And sooner or later, that pain finds its way back into the world in new forms, with new faces, repeating the same stories. So maybe true victory isn't in how a war ends, but in how it never had to begin. Maybe strength isn't proven by missiles fired, but by bridges built. Maybe the future isn't shaped by who dominates today, but by who chooses not to destroy it. Because someday, when the dust settles and the history books are written, the real question won't be about who had the bigger army. It will be, did we protect the ones who had no say? Did we give the next generation something better to live for? Or did we hand them a world even more broken than before? The fight we should be choosing is not one against each other, but for each other. Not one that divides, but one that dares to unite. That's not weakness. That's the kind of courage this world desperately needs. The strongest nations are not always the loudest. They're not always the ones parading missiles or flexing numbers on paper. Real strength is often quiet. It's found in restraint, not reaction. In choosing silence when the world expects you to shout. In choosing stillness when the world wants you to strike. The strongest nations are those that know when to fight, but more importantly, they know when not to. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's wisdom. It's the pause that protects, the stillness that speaks louder than threats ever could. It's the moment when a leader looks beyond pride, beyond pressure, and says, not today, not this way. And that choice, though unseen on maps and charts, is what truly shapes a nation's legacy. The world often tells us that to be respected, you must be feared, that to survive, you must dominate. But what if the opposite is true? What if lasting peace and lasting power come not from conquering others, but from mastering yourself? In a time when retaliation is glorified, when every insult demands a comeback and every injury invites revenge, it takes unshakable courage to do nothing, to not return fire, to not prove your strength through destruction. That kind of discipline isn't weakness. It's greatness in its purest form. There's something profoundly powerful about holding back, about having all the capacity to strike and still choosing not to. Because when you have nothing left to prove to anyone, when your leadership is grounded in purpose, not pride, you realize that the loudest answer isn't always the right one. Sometimes, it's the quiet decision that saves thousands. It's easy to fight. It's easy to raise a flag of war and call it duty. What's hard is to lead with compassion, to recognize that behind every decision, there are lives that will be changed forever. Children who will be orphaned, homes that will be shattered, dreams that will be erased in a single blast. And that weight, it sits differently on the shoulders of those who care enough to carry it. The strongest nations don't see silence as weakness. They see it as an act of service. They know that peace isn't just about avoiding conflict, it's about protecting people. It's about building a future that doesn't require war to feel secure. It's about seeing humanity in the eyes of the enemy and still choosing to walk away. It's in those moments of quiet resistance that history shifts. It's in those pauses between escalation and response where nations either rise or fall. Not by might, but by mercy. Not by control, but by conscience. Because what truly makes a country powerful isn't the number of tanks in its arsenal, it's the values in its heart. It's the way it treats its neighbors, it's the way it values human life, not just its own, but even those on the other side of the border. That's what separates empires that fall from nations that endure. Power without love is just noise. Authority without empathy is just... But strength, real strength, is when you can look at your adversary with every reason to attack and still choose restraint. When you realize that the price of action might be too high for the next generation to pay. That the sound of sirens might be louder than your national anthem. That silence at times is the loudest act of leadership. In every age, there comes a moment when a leader must decide, will I act out of ego or out of empathy? Will I do what's expected or what's right? Will I leave a legacy of fear or one of peace? And the strongest nations, those that truly shape the world for the better, are the ones that dare to answer these questions with humility. They are not remembered for how many battles they won, but for how many they prevented, for the lives they spared, for the wars they chose not to fight. Because in the end, it's not always about who was louder or who hit harder. It's about who had the courage to walk away before things fell apart, who valued life more than victory, and who understood that silence, when used with wisdom, can speak life into places where sound would only bring destruction. That's strength, that's leadership, and that's the kind of nation the world desperately needs.